Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Dave Greystone, and I've been a park ranger in Cherokee National Forest for 22 years. In all that time, I've built bridges across every creek and gorge you can imagine. Some were simple log crossings, others required real engineering work. But the bridge at Slick Rock Crossing, I never built that one, and according to every map I have, it shouldn't exist. People think being a ranger is just about giving directions to lost hikers and putting out campfires. That's part of it, sure. But when you work the backcountry like I do, you're also a construction worker, a rescue specialist, and sometimes a detective. The Joyce Kilmer Slick Rock Wilderness area is my territory, 2,000 acres of some of the oldest forest in America. Trees here are older than this country. Some of the tulip poplars are 40 feet around and 400 years old. I wasn't always a ranger. Did my time in the Gulf War as a combat engineer. That's where I learned about explosives and bridge construction. That's also where I lost my left leg below the knee to an IED. The prosthetic works fine most days, but it reminds me every morning that life can change in a heartbeat. After the war, I needed somewhere quiet. The forest gave me that. My ex-wife said I chose trees over family, and maybe she was right. Our daughter Katie was only 8 when we divorced. She's 23 now, living in Atlanta. We talk maybe once a month. I live in what used to be a maintenance shop at the end of a dirt road. Closest neighbor is 15 miles away. In winter, if the road washes out, I might not see another person for weeks. That's how I like it. The first report came in on a Tuesday morning in October. A group of college kids had been hiking the Slick Rock Creek Trail and claimed they found a bridge that wasn't on their GPS. They said it was a fancy suspension bridge, like something you'd see in a national park, with steel cables and wooden planks. But according to my records, there's no bridge at that location. Just a creek crossing where hikers have to wade through or hop rocks. I figured maybe some local kids had built something stupid and dangerous. Happens more than you'd think. So I loaded my truck with survey equipment and headed out to take a look. The drive to the trailhead takes about 40 minutes on Forest Service roads. The deeper you go, the older everything feels. The trees close in overhead until you're driving through a green tunnel. Cell service disappears after the first 10 miles. Radio contact gets sketchy. I parked at the Joyce Kilmer trailhead and shouldered my pack. The hike to Slick Rock Creek is about 3 miles through virgin forest. These aren't the skinny second-growth trees you see in most places. These are giants that were here before Europeans ever set foot in America. Walking among them feels like being in a cathedral made of wood and time. The October air was crisp, maybe 50 degrees, perfect hiking. Weather. The leaves were just starting to turn. Yellow tulip poplar, red maple, orange oak. In another week, the whole forest would be on fire with color. But something felt wrong from the start. The usual forest sounds were different. I've walked this trail hundreds of times, and I know how it should sound. Birds calling, squirrels chattering, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Today, everything was too quiet. My prosthetic was acting up too. Usually I don't even think about it, but today it felt loose, like it wasn't fitting right. I had to stop twice to adjust it. About 2 miles in, I noticed the first really weird thing. I came around a bend and saw a survey stake in the ground. Orange plastic flagging tape tied to it, the kind we use to mark construction sites. But I hadn't put any stakes here. Neither had anyone else on my crew. I pulled out my radio and tried to call headquarters. Static, not unusual in the deep woods, but my radio usually worked fine on this trail. The stake was about 6 inches into the ground, like it had been there for weeks. But the flagging tape looked new. I wrote down the GPS coordinates and kept walking. That's when the fog started rolling in. In October, you sometimes get morning fog in the low places, but this was different. It was coming uphill, flowing like water in reverse, and it was cold. Suddenly, the temperature dropped 20 degrees, and I could see my breath. I pulled on my jacket and kept walking. But now I was really paying attention. 22 years in these woods, and I've learned to trust my instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is. The trail follows Slick Rock Creek for the last mile, and that's where I heard it. The sound of construction, hammering, the whine of power tools, men shouting, but there was no construction scheduled in this area. No permits, no crews, nothing. I stopped and listened. The sounds were coming from up ahead, right where the college. Kids said they saw the bridge. But as I got closer, the sounds faded away. By the time I reached the creek crossing, everything was silent again. That's when I saw it, the bridge. I stood there staring for a full minute, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There was definitely a bridge, a real suspension bridge spanning Slick Rock Creek, maybe 60 feet long and 8 feet wide. Steel cables, wooden planking, even handrails. It looked professional, like something the Corps of Engineers would build. But I had never seen this bridge before. And I would have remembered it. I pulled out my GPS unit and checked my location. According to the satellite, I was standing at the exact coordinates where there should be a simple creek crossing, no bridge, just rocks and water. The GPS coordinates kept changing. 1 second it showed me in Tennessee, the next second, North Carolina. Then it would flicker between both states like it couldn't make up its mind. I tried my radio again, still static. But for a few seconds, I could swear I heard voices. Not my dispatcher, different voices, speaking in what sounded like Cherokee. That was impossible. Cherokee radio frequencies had been discontinued decades ago. I walked closer to the bridge. The construction was beautiful. Whoever built it knew what they were doing. The cable anchors were set deep into massive oak trees. The wooden planks were thick and perfectly fitted. Even the bolts looked hand-forged. But something about those planks bothered me. They were made from chestnut wood. American chestnut trees died out in this area 70 years ago from blight. You can't get wood like that anymore. I stepped onto the bridge to test its stability. The moment my foot touched the wooden planking, my prosthetic leg stopped hurting. The loose feeling disappeared completely. In fact, my artificial leg felt more natural than it had in years. The bridge was solid. No swaying or creaking. I walked to the center and looked down at the creek below. The water was running backward. Uphill. That was impossible. I took out my camera and snapped a few pictures. Through the viewfinder, the bridge looked normal. But when I checked the photos on the camera's display screen, they showed only the creek. No bridge. I tried again. Same result. I could see the bridge with my eyes, feel it under my feet, but the camera wouldn't capture it. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, expecting to see another hiker, but the bridge was empty. Just me and 60 feet of suspension bridge that shouldn't exist. The footsteps stopped. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed strangely, like I was in a much larger space than I actually was. No answer. But I could feel someone watching me. The feeling was so strong it made the hair on my neck stand up. I walked back to the south end of the bridge and examined the construction more carefully. The cable anchors weren't just set into the oak trees. They were grown into them, like the trees had been planted around the cables and had grown for decades with the metal inside them. Under one of the anchor points, I found something that made my blood go cold. Carved into the oak bark were symbols. Not random graffiti. Carefully carved symbols that looked like Cherokee syllabary. Below them, someone had carved a date, 1838. 1838 was the year of the Cherokee removal. The Trail of Tears. Thousands of Cherokee had been forced from these mountains and marched to Oklahoma. Many had died along the way. But if this carving was really from 1838, then this bridge had been here for over 150 years. That was impossible. The materials wouldn't last that long, especially not wooden planks. I took out my measuring tape and surveyed the bridge dimensions. 63 feet, 4 inches long. 8 feet, 2 inches wide. I wrote the numbers in my notebook and measured again. This time I got 61 feet, 7 inches long, and 8 feet, 6 inches wide. I measured a third time. 59 feet, 3 inches long, and 9 feet, 1 inch wide. The bridge was changing size. I packed up my equipment and got off the bridge as fast as I could. My hands were shaking as I wrote notes in my field book. I've been doing this job long enough to know the difference between equipment malfunction and something genuinely wrong. This was genuinely wrong. I hiked back to my truck and drove straight to headquarters. My supervisor, Jim Crawford, listened to my report with the patient expression he usually reserved for drunk campers reporting UFO sightings. "Dave, you feeling okay? You've been working pretty hard lately." "Jim, there's a bridge out there, a big one. It's not on any of our maps. Could be left over from some old logging operation. You know how those timber companies were back in the day. This isn't some old logging bridge. This is professional construction. Recent construction." Jim pulled out the forest maps and spread them on his desk. "Show me exactly where." I pointed to the location. Jim frowned and pulled out a newer topographical survey from last year. "Dave, according to this, that area was surveyed just 18 months ago for the new trail markers. No bridge reported. Then they missed it, a 60-foot suspension bridge. Kind of hard to miss." I could tell he thought I was losing it. Maybe I was. But I knew what I had seen. "I want to go back out there with a full survey team," I said. "Something's not right." Jim sighed. "Okay. Take Martinez from the Corps of Engineers. If there really is an unauthorized bridge, we need to document it properly. Safety inspection, environmental impact assessment, the whole deal." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those Cherokee symbols carved in the oak tree, about water flowing uphill, about my prosthetic leg feeling normal for the first time in 15 years. I called my daughter Katie. She lived in Atlanta now, worked for some tech company. "Hey, Dad. What's up? You don't usually call during the week. Just wanted to hear your voice. How's work?" "Same as always. You sound weird. Everything okay?" "Yeah, everything's fine." "Katie, do you remember your grandmother's stories about the old Cherokee legends?" Katie's grandmother on her mother's side had been part Cherokee. She used to tell stories about the spirit world and the places where the two worlds touched. Some of them. "Why? Do you remember anything about bridges or crossing between worlds?" "Dad, you're starting to worry me." "What's this about?" "Probably nothing. Just something I came across at work." "Well, I remember Grandma talking about the Nightland. That was like the Cherokee spirit world. She said there were places where you could cross over, but you had to be careful. Some people who crossed never came back." "Anything about bridges?" "I think so. She called them bone bridges, I think. Made from the bones of warriors or something." "Dad, seriously, what's going on?" "I'm sure it's nothing, just thought you might remember." But after I hung up, I wasn't sure of anything. The next morning, I met Colonel Sarah Martinez at the trailhead. Sarah was Corps of Engineers, specialized in wilderness bridge construction. We'd worked together on several projects over the years. If anyone could explain the bridge, it was her. "So Dave, Jim tells me you found a mystery bridge. Unauthorized construction?" "Something like that. You'll see." Sarah brought a full engineering survey kit, transit, electronic measuring devices, core sampling equipment. If this bridge was real, she'd document every bolt and cable. We hiked in together. Sarah was fit and kept up easily despite carrying 40 pounds of equipment. We talked about normal things, the weather, upcoming hunting season, her kids starting college. Normal conversation that made the whole situation feel less crazy. Until we got to the creek. The bridge was still there, but now it was different. "Jesus Christ," Sarah whispered. "Dave, this is incredible. This is professional-grade construction. When was this built?" "That's what I need you to tell me." Sarah set up her transit and began measuring. But like my GPS the day before, her equipment couldn't get consistent readings. "That's strange. My transit shows the bridge is 65 feet long, but my measuring tape says 58 feet. Try it again." She did. This time, both instruments showed different numbers, and different from each other. "Dave, my equipment doesn't malfunction like this. What's going on?" "I was hoping you could tell me." Sarah walked onto the bridge and immediately stopped. "The construction materials. Dave, some of this is modern steel cable. But look at these wooden planks. This is American chestnut. You can't get lumber like this anymore." She knelt and examined the bolts holding the planks. "These are hand-forged iron, not manufactured. Someone made these by hand. How old? The ironwork could be 100 years old. But the steel cables are modern. maybe 5 years old at most. How is that possible? It's not possible. Unless, she paused. Unless someone has been maintaining this bridge for decades, replacing parts as needed. But who would do that? And why isn't it on any maps? That's when we heard voices. Men talking in low voices, somewhere near the bridge. But we couldn't see anyone. Hello? Sarah called out. This is the Corps of Engineers. We need to speak with whoever constructed this bridge. The voices stopped. We searched the area around both ends of the bridge. No one there. No footprints. No evidence that anyone else had been in the area recently. Dave, this is really starting to creep me out. You want to head back? No, I need to understand this bridge. The construction is too good to ignore. Sarah set up her core sampling drill to take samples from the wooden planks. The drill was electric, powered by a small generator. She'd used it dozens of times. The drill wouldn't start. She checked the fuel, the spark plug, everything. The generator was in perfect working order. It just wouldn't start. I just used this yesterday. It was working fine. She tried my measuring tape. It worked normally until we got close to the bridge. Then the metal tape began curling and twisting like it was being affected by a strong magnetic field. Dave, there's some kind of electromagnetic interference here. That's why our instruments aren't working properly. What could cause that? Underground mineral deposits, maybe. Or, she paused, or electrical equipment. Big electrical equipment. We searched the area for power lines or generators. Nothing. The nearest electrical power was 30 miles away. That's when Sarah found the construction tools. They were buried in leaves near the north end of the bridge. A hand drill, chisels, a draw knife, and several other woodworking tools. All of them old, really old. Dave, look at these tools. This is 19th century craftsmanship, maybe older. The tools were in perfect condition, despite being obviously antique. The metal had no rust. The wooden handles showed wear, but no rot or weather damage. Someone's been maintaining these tools too, Sarah said, just like the bridge. I picked up the hand drill. The moment I touched it, I felt something like an electric shock. Not painful, but definitely there. And for just a second, I could swear I heard voices again. Men talking in Cherokee. Sarah, did you hear that? Hear what? The voices. Cherokee voices. Sarah looked at me with concern. Dave, I didn't hear anything. Are you feeling okay? I wasn't feeling okay. But I wasn't ready to admit that. We spent another hour documenting the bridge. Sarah's equipment worked normally as long as we stayed away from the bridge itself. But any instrument brought within 10 feet of the structure began malfunctioning. I need to report this to my superiors, Sarah said as we packed up. This bridge represents a significant safety hazard, and it's definitely unauthorized construction on federal land. What happens next? Investigation. Maybe bring in a full engineering team. We'll need to determine who built it and get proper permits. If they won't cooperate, we'll have to tear it down. The thought of tearing down the bridge made me surprisingly uncomfortable. Despite all the weirdness, the bridge was beautiful. It belonged here somehow. Sarah, what if we can't find who built it? Then we tear it down anyway. Can't have unauthorized structures in a federal wilderness area. That night, I did some research. I called Dr. Robert Littlecrow, who worked for the Cherokee Nation Cultural Preservation Office. Robert was an expert on Cherokee history in the Smoky Mountains. Dave, good to hear from you. What can I do for you? I told him about the bridge and the Cherokee symbols carved in the oak tree. Slick Rock Creek, you said? That's interesting. That area has significance in Cherokee tradition. What kind of significance? It's one of the traditional crossing points to the Nightland, the spirit world. Cherokee people believed there were specific places where the barrier between the physical world and the spirit world was thin. Crossing points? Places where spirits could move between worlds. And sometimes where living people could cross over too. But it was dangerous. Not everyone who crossed came back. What about bridges? Robert was quiet for a long moment. There are stories about bone bridges, bridges built by spirits to help worthy souls cross to the Nightland, made from the bones of warriors who died, protecting the people. Bone bridges? Just legends, Dave. Old stories. But his voice didn't sound like he thought they were just stories. Robert, hypothetically, if one of these crossing points became active, what would that mean? In traditional belief, it would mean the spirit world was calling for someone who needed to cross over. Someone dying? Not necessarily. Sometimes the spirits called for living people who had important work to do in the Nightland. Healers, warriors, bridges between worlds. Bridges between worlds? People who could help maintain balance between the physical and spirit worlds. Very rare, very powerful. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen, staring out at the dark forest. I kept thinking about my prosthetic leg feeling normal on the bridge, about the voices speaking Cherokee, about tools buried in leaves that should have rotted decades ago. And I kept thinking about the missing hikers. Over the past 2 years, we'd had 6 hikers disappear in the Slick Rock Creek area. All experienced backpackers, all hiking alone, all last seen near the creek crossing. We'd searched for them with dogs, helicopters, everything. Never found any trace. No bodies, no equipment, no evidence of what happened to them. But now I wondered, what if they hadn't disappeared? What if they had crossed over? I pulled out the missing persons files and spread them on my kitchen table. 6 hikers. All men, ages 25 to 45. All in good physical condition. All described by family as seeking spiritual experience or searching for meaning in life. All last seen in the area where an impossible bridge now spanned Slick Rock Creek. I called Jim Crawford at home. Dave? It's almost midnight. What's wrong? Jim, those missing hikers. The ones near Slick Rock Creek. I think I know what happened to them. Dave, go to sleep. We'll talk about this in the morning. Jim, I think they crossed the bridge. What bridge? The one you think you saw? The one that's really there. The one that leads to the Nightland. There was a long pause. Dave, I want you to take a few days off. I think you've been working too hard. But I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't seeing things. I was seeing the truth. I couldn't sleep. By 3 a.m., I was dressed and driving back to the trailhead with a headlamp and my emergency gear. I had to see the bridge at night. I had to understand what was really happening. The forest at night is a different world. My headlamp beam only reached 20 feet, and beyond that was absolute darkness. Every sound was amplified. Every shadow could be hiding anything. But I wasn't afraid. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. The hike took longer in the dark. I had to be careful not to trip on roots or lose the trail. My prosthetic leg was working perfectly again, better than it had in months. When I reached the creek, the bridge was glowing. Not bright, just a soft silver light that seemed to come from within the wooden planks themselves. Like moonlight, but there was no moon visible through the thick canopy. I turned off my headlamp and stood in the darkness, watching the bridge glow. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. That's when I saw him. A figure standing at the center of the bridge. Tall, wearing what looked like traditional Cherokee clothing. Buckskin shirt, leggings, and a feathered headdress. But he was translucent, like he was made of morning mist. The bridge keeper. I knew without being told that this was what Robert Littlecrow had been talking about. The guardian of the crossing point between worlds. He turned and looked directly at me. His face was ancient, weathered like stone, with eyes that held centuries of sadness and wisdom. "You have been called," he said. His voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, the trees, the water, the earth itself. Called for what? To serve. To protect. To maintain the balance between worlds. I stepped onto the bridge. My prosthetic leg immediately felt warm and natural, like it was made of flesh and bone instead of titanium and plastic. "The missing hikers," I said. "They crossed over, didn't they? Those who were ready, those who chose to cross. And the others, the ones who weren't ready?" The bridge keeper gestured to the north end of the bridge. In the silver light, I could see shapes in the forest. People sitting quietly among the trees, waiting. They looked solid, real, but there was something wrong about them. They were too still, too patient. They wait for judgment. Some will be allowed to cross, others will return to your world. What about me? Why was I called? You understand sacrifice. You understand service. Your body bears the marks of protecting others. He gestured to my prosthetic leg. The bridge needs a dollar's guardian in your world. Someone who can prevent the unprepared from crossing accidentally. Someone who can guide those who are truly ready. You want me to stay here? Guard the bridge? The bridge exists in both worlds. As guardian, you would exist in both worlds as well. You would keep your life in the physical realm, but serve the spiritual realm when needed. I thought about my empty house, my distant relationship with Katie, my job that had become routine. Then I thought about the 6 hikers who had crossed over, and their families who would never know what happened to them. What would I have to do? Accept the responsibility. Allow the bridge to exist permanently. Guide those who come seeking passage. And if I say no, the bridge will disappear. The crossing point will close. Those who have already crossed will be trapped in the nightland forever. I looked back at the shapes waiting in the forest, 6 figures sitting patiently among the trees. The missing hikers. If I accept, can they return to their families? Those who choose to return, yes. But some may prefer to remain in the nightland. That's when I heard vehicles approaching through the forest. Headlights flickering between the trees, engines straining on the rough trail. Sarah had brought the full engineering team. Choose quickly, the bridge keeper said. Your people come to destroy what they do not understand. I could hear voices now, multiple people hiking up the trail with heavy equipment. Sarah's voice directing the team, Jim Crawford coordinating with Park Service law enforcement. They were coming to tear down the bridge. If I accept, what happens to my normal life? You continue as before, but with additional responsibilities. You will know when the bridge is needed. You will feel when someone approaches who requires guidance. The voices were getting closer. I had maybe 5 minutes before they reached the creek. I thought about my daughter Katie and whether I'd ever be able to explain this to her. I thought about my quiet life in the forest and how it had always felt like I was waiting for something important to happen. I accept. The moment I said it, everything changed. The bridge keeper smiled, and his translucent form became more solid. The bridge stopped glowing and looked like normal construction again. My prosthetic leg felt permanently natural, like my original leg had been restored. And I could see both worlds. The physical world where Sarah's team was approaching with chainsaws and demolition equipment, and the spirit world where ancient Cherokee villages existed alongside the creek, where the missing hikers sat in a place of peace and beauty that had no equivalent in our reality. The choice is theirs now, the bridge keeper said, gesturing to the waiting figures. They may return to your world or remain in the nightland. One by one, the missing hikers stood up and walked toward me. I recognized them from the missing persons files. Tom Martinez, the accountant from Nashville. James Wright, the teacher from Knoxville. All of them, older somehow, calmer. We've been waiting for you, Tom said. We knew someone would come who could help us choose. Choose what? Whether to go home or stay here. In the nightland, we don't age, we don't get sick. We don't worry about money or jobs or any of the things that made life difficult. But your families think you're dead. We can visit them in dreams. They'll know we're at peace. 3 of the hikers chose to return to the physical world. 3 chose to remain in the nightland. I helped the returning hikers cross back over the bridge just as Sarah's team reached the creek. Dave, Sarah shouted, get away from that bridge. We're going to have to bring it down. But when she looked at the creek, she stopped. The bridge was gone. Where? Where did it go? I was standing in the middle of Slick Rock Creek on the rocks, like I had waded across. The 3 returning hikers were with me, wet and confused but alive. Sarah, we've got bigger problems. I found the missing hikers. The reunion with the families was emotional and complicated. The 3 who returned couldn't fully explain where they'd been or why they'd disappeared. They just said they'd gotten lost and found shelter in caves. It wasn't the complete truth, but it was a truth their families could accept. I never mentioned the bridge to the investigation team. As far as they knew, I'd found the hikers in a remote cave system and helped them find their way out. But I knew the bridge was still there. I could feel it, like a warm presence in the back of my mind. And I knew that someday, someone else would need to cross between worlds, and I would be there to help them make the choice. That was 3 months ago. Life has mostly returned to normal, at least on the surface. I still live in my converted maintenance shop. I still patrol the same trails and build the same creek crossings. But everything is different now. I can feel when someone approaches the bridge site with a genuine need to cross over, It's like a warm pulse in my chest, growing stronger as they get closer. Most people just hike past the creek crossing and never see anything unusual, but for those who truly need it, the bridge appears. Last month, an elderly Cherokee woman named Emma Waterbird came hiking up the trail. She was 93 years old and had been battling cancer for 2 years. She felt the bridge calling to her in dreams. I met her at the creek crossing, and we talked for an hour about her choice. In the end, she decided to cross over to the Nightland to join her ancestors. Her family understood. They said she'd been preparing for the journey for months. 2 weeks ago, a young soldier came to the bridge. He'd lost his entire unit in Afghanistan and couldn't live with the bridge in. Survivor's guilt. The bridge keeper appeared to both of us and explained that the soldier's work in this world wasn't finished. He had children to raise and other soldiers to help heal. The soldier chose to return to his life, but with a new sense of purpose. The bridge doesn't appear for everyone who's suffering, only for those who truly stand at a crossroads between life and death, or between their current life and a completely different existence. My job is to help them understand the choice and make it freely. Katie came to visit last month. I told her about my new responsibilities, or at least as much as she could understand and accept. She surprised me. "Dad, you seem different, happier, more peaceful." I found my purpose. Does it have to do with Grandma's old stories? About the bridges between worlds? Something like that. She didn't ask for details, and I didn't volunteer them. Some truths are too big to share with people who aren't ready. But I did say something that made me think. "Dad, I'm glad you found what you were looking for. You've seemed lost since you came back from the war." Maybe she was right. Maybe I'd been lost for 15 years, and it took an impossible bridge and a choice between worlds to help me find my way. The official records show that I found the 3 missing hikers in a remote cave system. The other 3 hikers remain officially missing, though I've arranged for their families to receive dreams, letting them know their loved ones are at peace. Colonel Martinez submitted her report, stating that no unauthorized bridge was found at the Slick Rock Creek crossing. The electromagnetic interference was attributed to underground mineral deposits. Dr. Little Crow and I have become friends. We meet once a month to discuss Cherokee traditions and the responsibility of maintaining balance between worlds. He's never directly acknowledged the bridge, but he always asks if I'm maintaining proper respect for the crossing point. I've started learning Cherokee language and traditions. If I'm going to serve as guardian of a Cherokee spiritual site, I should understand the culture I'm protecting. My prosthetic leg continues to work perfectly. Some mornings I forget I ever lost my original leg. The VA doctors are amazed by how well I've adapted, but I can't explain the real reason for the improvement. The forest feels different now too, more alive, more aware. I can sense the connections between the physical and spiritual worlds everywhere, not just at the bridge site. Animals behave differently around me. They're not afraid, but they show a kind of respect, like they know I serve a purpose they understand. I keep a journal now, documenting each person who comes to the bridge and the choice they make. Someday, someone else may need to take over as guardian, and they'll need to understand the responsibility. The bridge appears maybe once a month, sometimes more, sometimes less. Each crossing is different. Each choice is deeply personal. I never try to influence anyone's decision. I just help them understand what they're choosing between. Last week, I got a letter from Tom Martinez, one of the hikers who chose to return. He started a nonprofit organization helping other people who've had near-death experiences. He says he feels called to help people understand that there are more worlds than the one we can see. I think about the bridge keeper often. He appears whenever someone is making the crossing, but we rarely speak. His job is to judge worthiness. Mine is to help people understand their options. We work together but serve different functions. The hardest part of this job is the loneliness. I can't share the truth with most people. They wouldn't understand, and it might interfere with their own spiritual journey. Everyone has to find their own path to the bridge. But I'm not really alone. I can feel the presence of the bridge keeper and all the spirits who maintain the balance between worlds. And I know that every choice made at the bridge affects both worlds in ways I'm just beginning to understand. Sometimes hikers ask me about the legends they've heard, stories of missing people and mysterious bridges in Cherokee National Forest. I tell them that the mountains hold many secrets, and some secrets reveal themselves only to those who need them. The bridge at Slick Rock Crossing still stands, somewhere between the world we know and the world we're all traveling toward. I keep watch here, where ancient Cherokee wisdom meets the needs of modern souls seeking peace. Every crossing is a choice, and every choice echoes through both worlds. If you're ever hiking in Cherokee National Forest and you feel called to wander off the marked trails, if you find yourself drawn to a creek crossing that doesn't match your map, if you discover a bridge that shouldn't exist, remember that choices have consequences. And some bridges can only be crossed once. I'll be there to help you understand what you're choosing, but the choice itself will always be yours alone. My name is Bill Ravenscraft, and I've been a ranger in Daniel Boone National Forest for 15 years. I've pulled bodies out of every cave, from Natural Bridge to Cumberland Gap. Broken legs, heart attacks, kids who wandered too far from their parents. But what we found in Blood Creek Hollow, that wasn't just another accident. It was October 1973, and the leaves were perfect that year. Orange and red covered the mountains like fire. I was stationed at the Red River Gorge, living in an old fire tower I'd fixed up myself. Third-generation Kentucky mountain man. Just like my daddy and his daddy before him. The mountains were in my blood. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 3 college kids from UK. Geology students doing some kind of research project. They'd been camping at Natural Bridge for 4 days. Should have checked in Monday. When they didn't show up for their Tuesday classes, their professor called it in. Probably just lost track of time, Detective Morrison told me over the radio. You know how these college kids are. But I didn't think so. I'd met these kids when they got their permits. Sarah Chen, Mike Rodriguez, and Tommy Whitfield. Smart kids, careful. They had good gear and knew what they were doing. Sarah had climbed in Colorado. Mike grew up camping with his dad. Tommy was local. His family had been in these mountains almost as long as mine. I loaded up my truck with the usual gear. Rope, medical kit, emergency radio, headlamps. Threw in my 357 for good measure. You never knew what you might run into in the woods. Bears mostly, but sometimes worse. Sometimes people who didn't want to be found. The drive to their campsite took me down old logging roads that hadn't seen traffic in years. The deeper I went into Blood Creek Hollow, the quieter it got. No birds singing. No squirrels chattering in the trees. Even the bugs seemed to have gone somewhere else. That should have been my first warning. Their camp was maybe 200 yards from the Natural Bridge Trail. Close enough to hear other hikers during the day, far enough for privacy. I found their tents first, 2 blue ones and a yellow one, all still set up neat and proper. But something was wrong with the scene. Their stuff was scattered everywhere. Not like animals had gotten into it, more like they'd left in a hurry. Sleeping bags pulled halfway out of tents. A camp stove still had yesterday's coffee in it, thick as mud. Sarah's backpack was open, clothes spilling out like she'd been digging for something fast. I called out their names. Sarah, Mike, Tommy. My voice echoed off the limestone cliffs and died. The silence that followed felt heavy, like it was pushing down on me. That's when I saw the blood, just drops at first, leading away from the camp toward the creek. Then more. A lot more. The trail led to the base of a cliff where a narrow crack in the rock opened up into darkness. A cave entrance I'd never seen before, even though I'd been hiking these trails for 20 years. Something about that cave made my skin crawl. The air coming out of it smelled wrong, not just musty like most caves, but sweet and rotten. Like meat left too long in the sun, I radioed Morrison. Found their camp, signs of trouble, requesting backup and a search team. How much trouble are we talking about, Bill? I looked at the blood trail disappearing into that crack in the rock. The kind that makes good kids vanish in the middle of the night. Morrison showed up 2 hours later with a full search team. 4 state troopers, 2 EMTs, and a German shepherd named Rex, who specialized in finding people. Rex was a good dog. I'd worked with him before. But when we brought him to the cave entrance, he whined and backed away. Wouldn't get within 10 feet of that crack in the rock. Never seen him do that, said his handler, a young trooper named Davis. Rex has tracked people through mine shafts and storm, Drains. He ain't afraid of dark spaces. We set up a command post at the Natural Bridge parking area and started working the scene properly. Morrison took photos while I mapped out the blood trail. The EMTs examined the camp for any clues about what might have happened. Could be a bear, suggested one of the troopers. Blood, scattered gear, people running scared. But I'd seen bear attacks. This wasn't that. Bears don't take camping gear. They don't arrange abandoned clothes in neat little piles. And they sure don't leave footprints like the ones I was seeing in the soft dirt near the cave. Morrison, come look at this. He knelt down beside me at the cave entrance. The footprints were clear in the mud, 3 sets of sneakers heading into the cave. But mixed in with them were other prints. Bare feet, long and narrow. Too long to be human, with what looked like claw marks at the tips. What do you think made those? Morrison asked. I didn't answer. I was thinking about stories my grandfather used to tell. Old mountain stories about people who went hungry too long during hard times. People who developed a taste for meat that wasn't supposed to be eaten. But those were just stories. Weren't they? We waited for proper cave rescue equipment before going in. Protocol. But while we waited, more strange things started happening. The temperature around the cave dropped 10 degrees, even though it was a warm October day. Our radios started picking up static, inyo-geo, voices speaking words I couldn't understand. And twice, I could have sworn I heard someone calling for help from deep inside that crack in the rock. We're going in, I told Morrison around sunset. Regulations say we wait for the specialist team from Louisville. They'll be here in the morning. Those kids might not have until morning. I went in first, Morrison right behind me. The crack opened up into a tunnel about 6 feet high and 4 feet wide. Our headlamps cut through the darkness, showing limestone walls wet with condensation. The sweet, rotten smell got stronger as we went deeper. The tunnel curved to the left and opened into a larger chamber. That's where we found the first body. It was Tommy Whitfield, but I almost didn't recognize him. He was hanging upside down from a rope tied around his ankles, suspended from a natural hook in the ceiling. His throat had been cut, and all the blood had drained out of him into a rusty metal bucket placed underneath. Morrison threw up. I wanted to, but I'd seen worse things in Vietnam. What bothered me more was how fresh Tommy looked. He'd been missing for 3 days, but his body hadn't started decomposing. It was like he'd been hung there just hours ago. Jesus Christ, Morrison whispered. Who would do this? That's when we heard the scratching. It came from deeper in the cave system, W2 fingernails on rock, slow and deliberate, like something was coming toward us, something that knew we were there. I drew my 357. We're leaving, now. But when we turned around, the tunnel we'd come through was different, narrower. The walls seemed to pulse in our headlamp beams like they were breathing, and from somewhere in the darkness ahead of us came a sound that made my blood freeze. Laughter. Human, but not quite right, like someone who'd forgotten how laughing was supposed to sound. This way, I whispered, grabbing Morrison's arm. There was another passage leading off to the right. We took it, moving fast but quiet. The new tunnel led us through a maze of limestone chambers and narrow passages. Some were natural, carved out by thousands of years of water flow, but others looked like they'd been dug by hand. The walls were covered in symbols scratched deep into the rock, crude pictures of people and animals and things I couldn't identify. We found Sarah Chen in the 3rd chamber. She was alive, barely, tied to a wooden post that had been driven into the cave floor. Her clothes were torn and bloody, and she'd been cut in dozens of places. Small cuts, like someone had been tasting her blood a little at a time. Sarah, I whispered, cutting her loose. We're here to help. She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. They're coming back, she said. They're always hungry. Who's coming back? The family, the ones who live in the deep caves. They only come out to feed. I got Sarah to her feet while Morrison covered the tunnel entrance with his service weapon. She was weak but could walk. We had to get out of there before. The laughter came again, closer now, and with it the sound of bare feet running on stone. We ran through those caves for what felt like hours, carrying Sarah between us when her legs gave out. The tunnels seemed to change every time we turned around. Passages that had been there moments before vanished into solid rock. New openings appeared where walls used to be. The "Mountain is alive," Sarah kept saying. "It moves to keep us here." I'd been in cave systems all over Kentucky, but this was different. This wasn't natural. The limestone walls were warm to the touch, and I could swear I felt them shifting when I wasn't looking directly at them. We finally found a chamber with multiple exits and decided to rest. Morrison set up a defensive position while I checked Sarah's wounds. She'd lost a lot of blood, but the cuts were shallow. Whoever had done this to her wanted her alive. "Tell me what happened," I said, giving her water from my canteen. The first night was normal. We set up camp, cooked dinner, planned our cave survey for the next day. Tommy had been here before as a kid. Said there were caves his grandfather showed him that weren't on any maps. She drank some water and continued. "We heard something moving around our camp after midnight. At first we thought it was a bear or maybe another camper. But when we looked out of our tents, we saw them." "Who?" "People. But wrong somehow. Too thin, like they hadn't eaten in months. And their teeth." She touched her neck where thin scab lines showed. They had pointed teeth, filed down sharp. Morrison was listening from his position by the tunnel entrance. "How many?" "6 or 7. They moved so quietly. Before we could even scream, they were in our tents. They grabbed Tommy first, dragged him toward the cave. Mike tried to fight them, but they were strong. Stronger than people should be." "What happened to Mike?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "They made us watch. They hung him from a tree and cut him open while he was still alive. They filled their water bottles with his blood and passed them around like they were sharing wine." That's when I heard the scratching again, coming from multiple tunnels this time. "They're here," Sarah whispered. Morrison raised his gun toward the largest tunnel opening. "How many rounds you got, Bill?" I checked my 357. 6, plus a box of shells in my pack. "I've got a full magazine, 18 rounds. Think that'll be enough?" Before I could answer, they came out of the darkness. I'd been expecting people. Crazy hillbilly cannibals like something out of a horror movie. But what crawled into our chamber wasn't quite human anymore. They moved on all fours, their arms and legs too long for their bodies. Their skin was pale gray, stretched tight over bones that showed through like coat hangers. And their faces still looked human, but wrong. Eyes too large and completely black. Mouths full of teeth that had been filed to points. And when they smiled at us, and they did smile, I could see dried blood caked between their teeth. The biggest one stood up on its hind legs and spoke. "You found our larder," it said in a voice like grinding stone. "We don't like it when outsiders disturb our food." Morrison opened fire. His first shot took the Perpositus, the speaker in the chest, spinning it around. Black blood sprayed the cave wall. But it didn't go down. It laughed and kept coming. The others scattered, moving faster than anything human should be able to move. They crawled up the walls and across the ceiling like giant spiders. Morrison kept firing, but they were too quick. His bullets sparked off limestone, where they'd been a split second before. I grabbed Sarah and pulled her toward the smallest tunnel opening. "This way!" We crawled through on our hands and knees while Morrison provided cover. Behind us, I heard him scream. When I looked back, 3 of those things were on top of him, their pointed teeth tearing at his throat. The tunnel led to another chamber, this one filled with bones. Human bones, piled in neat stacks along the walls. Some were old and yellow, but others still had meat on them, fresh meat. "How long have they been down here?" I asked Sarah. "Generations. They told me their family came here during the Civil War. Deserters who got lost in the caves and had to eat their dead to survive. But eating human flesh changed them, made them hungry for it, always hungry." In the center of the bone chamber, I found what was left of Mike Rodriguez. They'd butchered him like a deer, hanging the pieces from hooks driven into the ceiling. His head sat on a stone altar, eyes staring at nothing. That's when I saw the symbols carved into the altar, the same ones I'd seen on the tunnel walls, but older. Much older. These weren't made by Civil War deserters. These went back centuries. "Sarah, look at this." She crawled over to where I was kneeling by the altar. "Oh God, those are Cherokee." My anthropology professor showed us symbols like this. They're warning markers. Warning about what? Places where the dead are restless, where old hungers never die. The scratching started again, coming from all around us now. They'd found our trail. Is there another way out of Cull? Here? I asked. Sarah looked around the bone chamber with desperate eyes. I don't know. I've been lost since they brought me down here. But I think there might be something deeper. I heard water running when they took me to the feeding room. The feeding room? Where they keep the ones they're saving for later. There were others down there, Bill. People who've been missing for weeks. I made a decision that probably saved our lives and definitely damned my soul. I picked up one of the bone knives from the altar. A human thigh bone sharpened to a point and wrapped with what looked like human hair. It felt wrong in my hand, but my 357 was almost empty, and those things were getting closer. Stay behind me, I told Sarah. And if I don't make it out of here, you tell people what happened. You tell them to stay away from Blood Creek Hollow. The tunnel beyond the bone chamber led deeper into the mountain than I'd ever been before. The air got warmer as ever so. We descended, and the smell of death got stronger. But mixed in with it now was something else. Smoke from wood fires and the sound of running water. We came out into a vast underground cavern lit by torches made from human bones wrapped in strips of cloth soaked in what I hoped wasn't what I thought it was. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above us, and across the cavern floor I could see crude shelters built from stacked stones and animal hides. This wasn't just a cave. This was a village. How many of them are there? I whispered to Sarah. I counted at least 20 when they brought me here, but I think there are more in the deeper caves. The creatures, I couldn't think of them as people anymore, were gathered around a fire pit in the center of the cavern. They were sharing a meal, passing around chunks of meat and bowls of dark liquid. The meat was fresh and red, and one of the bowls still had a University of Kentucky student ID floating in it. Poor Mike Rodriguez. But what made my blood run cold wasn't what they were eating. It was what they were saving. Along the far wall of the cavern, I could see cages made from bones and twisted metal. Some were empty, but others held people. Living people who watched us with eyes full of hope and terror. We have to get them out, Sarah said. With what? My last 3 bullets? But even as I said it, I knew we had to try. These things had been killing people for over a century, and nobody had ever stopped them. Nobody had ever even known they existed. If Sarah and I died here, they'd just keep hunting, keep feeding. I was reaching for my gun when I heard footsteps behind us. I wouldn't do that if I were you, son. I spun around to see an old woman standing in the tunnel entrance. She was small and bent with age, wearing a dress that might have been white once but was now stained brown with old blood. Her hair was long and gray, braided with what looked like finger bones. Ruby Mae Hopkins, Sarah breathed. The herbalist from town. I thought you were dead. Dead? The old woman cackled. Child, I've been keeping these mountains fed for longer than you've been alive, keeping the balance, keeping the peace. She walked into the cavern, and the creatures around the fire pit looked up at her with something that might have been respect or fear. You see, young ranger, Ruby Mae continued, these people have an arrangement with the mountain families. Has been for generations. We provide them with what they need, and they don't come to town looking for it. Works out fine for everyone. Everyone except the people you feed to them. Outsiders, she spat. College kids and hikers who don't belong in these mountains anyway. Better them than our own children. I understood now. This wasn't just about some cursed family of cannibals. This was about a whole community that had been covering up murders for over 100 years. Local families working with monsters to protect themselves. The missing persons reports, I said. You've been steering them away from the real search areas. Someone has to keep the secret. Someone has to keep the balance. Ruby Mae raised her hand, and I saw she was holding something. A bone whistle. She put it to her lips and blew a note so low I felt it more than heard it. The creatures stopped eating and looked at us, all of them. Their black eyes reflected the torchlight like mirrors. Time to feed the family, Ruby Mae said. They came at us like a wave of nightmare. I shot the first one in the face, saw its head snap back in a spray of black blood. But it kept coming. My second shot took it in the chest, and it stumbled but didn't fall. My third and final bullet went into the thing's throat, and that finally dropped it. But there were 20 more behind it. Sarah grabbed a torch from the wall and swung it at the nearest creature. The flame caught its hair and spread quickly. It screamed and rolled on the ground, but the others just stepped over it and kept coming. That's when I remembered something my grandfather had told me. Stories about the Cherokee and their medicine men. About curses that could be broken if you knew the right words. I pulled out the bone knife I'd taken from the altar and cut my palm, letting blood drip onto the cavern floor. By the blood of my ancestors, I shouted, by the treaties broken and the dead unavenged, I call on the spirits of this mountain to judge between us. The creatures stopped. Ruby May's face went white. You don't know what you're doing, boy. You don't know what powers you're calling on. But I did know. My great-grandfather had been part Cherokee, though he'd never talked about it much. But he'd taught me some of the old words, the old ways. And right now, with death coming for us from all sides, those old words were our only hope. I challenge the right of these creatures to hunt in Cherokee lands. I continued, cutting deeper into my palm. I demand justice for the innocents they've killed. The air in the cavern began to change. The torches flickered, and a wind that had no earthly source began to blow. The creatures backed away from me, making sounds like frightened animals. And then she appeared, an old Cherokee woman, dressed in traditional clothes and carrying a staff topped with eagle feathers. She was translucent, like smoke, but her presence filled the cavern with power that made the creatures cower. I am the medicine woman who laid the original curse, she said in a voice like distant thunder. These ones broke the sacred law. They consumed the flesh of their own kind and became abominations. But the curse can be lifted if one of their blood chooses to break the cycle. She pointed her staff at the cages along the wall. Free the innocents. Let them choose their own fate. I ran to the cages while Sarah kept the prost, creatures at bay with her torch. The locks were simple, just rope and wooden pins. Inside the cages, I found 12 people in various stages of weakness and terror. Some had been there for weeks. Can you walk? I asked them. Most could, barely. We helped the weakest ones to their feet and started moving toward the tunnel entrance. But Ruby May wasn't finished with us. You've doomed us all, she screamed, pulling a pistol from under her dress. Without the feeding agreement, they'll come to town, they'll kill everyone. She aimed the gun at the Cherokee spirit woman, but the bullet passed right through her and struck one of the creatures instead. It collapsed with a shriek that echoed through the cavern. The other creatures turned on Ruby May with a fury that was terrible to see. They fell on her like starving dogs, and her screams cut off abruptly. The curse is broken, the medicine woman said, but the choice remains. They can choose to die as humans or continue as monsters. Most of them chose to die. They collapsed one by one as the unnatural hunger that had kept them alive for over a century finally released them. A few ran deeper into the caves, choosing their monstrous existence over death. They will trouble you no more, the Cherokee spirit told me. But beware, there are other hollows, other curses. The mountains remember everything. And then she was gone. We got the survivors out just as the cave system began to collapse. The mountain was taking back its own, sealing the feeding chambers forever. Sarah and I barely made it to the surface before tons of limestone crashed down, blocking the entrance. The official report listed it as a cave-in caused by recent heavy rains. 12 people rescued, 3 confirmed dead. The families of the missing students received closure, and Blood Creek Hollow was declared permanently unstable and closed to the public. But I knew the truth, and so did the Cherokee Tribal Council when they came to perform cleansing ceremonies the next week. You did well, the medicine man told me, but this won't be the last time. The old hungers run deep in these mountains, and not all of them can be satisfied with the blood of the willing. He was right. Over the next 5 years, I investigated 17 more cases of supernatural activity in the Daniel Boone National Forest. Some were like Blood Creek, ancient curses fed by modern complicity. Others were different kinds of hungry things that had found new ways to feed. I kept my ranger job, but worked with a different understanding now. I wasn't just protecting hikers from bears and broken trails. I was standing guard against things that had been hunting in these mountains since before the Cherokee, things that would continue hunting long after I was gone. Sarah recovered from her physical wounds, but the mental ones took longer to heal. She changed her major to folklore studies and now works with tribal councils across Appalachia. documenting supernatural threats and teaching people how to recognize them. We never found Mike Rodriguez's body. What was left of him went down with the caves. I still live in the fire tower overlooking Red River Gorge. On clear nights, I can see Blood Creek Hollow in the distance. The government put up warning signs and a chain-link fence, but those won't keep out the truly determined. Sometimes hikers still go missing in the deep woods. Sometimes we find them, and sometimes we don't. But now I know to look for the signs, the unnatural silence, the wrong smells. The feeling that something old and hungry is watching from the shadows. The mountains remember everything. Every treaty broken, every grave disturbed, every wrong that goes unpunished. We stopped the hungry ones in Blood Creek, but there are other hollows, other curses. Some were meant to protect, others to punish. And the difference isn't always clear until it's too late. Last month, a geology student from Eastern Kentucky University called about getting permits to survey caves in the Red River Gorge area. She mentioned she'd heard about some interesting limestone formations in a place called Devil's Kitchen Hollow. I told her those caves were closed indefinitely. Some doors are better left unopened, some hungers are better left unfed, and some stories are better left untold. But when the next ranger takes over this station, I'll leave them a file. Everything I've learned about what really lives in these mountains. Because someone has to keep watch. Someone has to remember. Someone has to be ready when the hungry ones come calling again. My name is Michael Ashburner, and I've been fighting fires for 34 years. Started when I was 16, right after my family died in a house fire. Mom, Dad, little sister Emma, all gone in one night while I was staying at a friend's place. That fire changed everything, made me who I am today. I work as a ranger now in the George Washington National Forest, up on Shenandoah Mountain. Been here 17 years, living in an old fire tower I fixed up myself. Most people think it's lonely, but I like the quiet. Gives me time to think, to watch for smoke, to do my job right. It was August 1987 when everything started going wrong. We hadn't seen rain in 6 weeks, and the forest was dry as old paper. The temperature hit 95 degrees every day, even in the shade. I'd been putting up fire restriction signs all month, warning campers and hikers to stay away. The whole mountain was like a giant pile of kindling, just waiting for a spark. That's when the first body turned. Tommy Walsh found it, or what was left of it. Tommy runs the gas station down in the valley, does some hunting when he can. He called me on the radio, voice shaking so bad I could barely understand him. "Mike, you need to get down here to Willow Creek. There's... Jesus, I don't know what this is." I grabbed my gear and drove down the mountain road. The air was thick and still, not even a breeze to move the leaves. When I got to the creek, Tommy was standing about 20 feet back from a pile of gray ash, his face white as a sheet. "I was tracking a deer," he said, not taking his eyes off the ash. "Found this instead. Mike, there ain't no way this is natural." He was right. I've seen every kind of fire death you can imagine, but this was different. The ash pile was shaped like a person, head, arms, legs, all there in perfect outline. But everything around it was untouched. Green grass, dry leaves, even a paper napkin that must have blown over from somewhere. None of it burned. Just the person. I took pictures, measured everything, checked for signs of accelerant. Nothing made sense. The ash was still warm, but there wasn't a scorch mark anywhere else. No burn pattern, no fuel source, no sign of how this fire could have started. "You know who this was?" I asked Tommy. He nodded, looking sick. "Pete Morrison. Saw his truck parked up the road. Had camping gear in the back." I knew Pete. He'd been cited 3 times this summer for illegal campfires. Always said the rules didn't apply to him. Guess he was wrong about that. I called the state fire marshal and the sheriff's office, then set up a perimeter around the scene. While I waited for backup, I walked the area, looking for any clue that might explain what happened. The forest was dead quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing moving at all. Even the creek seemed to run quieter than usual. That's when I noticed the smell. Not the usual smoke smell from a fire, but something else. Something sweet and bitter at the same time, like burning hair mixed with candy. It made my stomach turn. As the sun went down, I saw something that made me step back fast. Little footprints in the ash around Pete's remains. Child-sized prints, like someone had been dancing around the body. But they weren't burned into the ground. They were made of ash itself, raised up like tiny sculptures. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The prints were still there. That was when I first heard the laughter. Soft, like children playing somewhere far away. But there weren't any children up here. There wasn't anyone up here at all. Captain Ray Sullivan from the State Fire Marshal's office showed up around midnight with a full investigation team. Ray's a good man, been doing this almost as long as me. But when he saw the scene, his face went pale. "Mike, what the hell happened here?" "I was hoping you could tell me," I said. We worked through the night, taking samples, measurements, photographs. The lab boys tested everything twice. No accelerants, no electrical source, no natural gas. The victim's clothes and personal items were completely gone, but his wallet was sitting 3 feet away, untouched. Even the cash inside wasn't singed. "Temperature readings are all wrong," said Dr. Chen, the forensic specialist. "This fire burned at over 3,000 degrees. That's hotter than a crematorium." "But how?" Ray asked. "Where did that kind of heat come from?" Nobody had an answer. As dawn broke over the mountain, I noticed something else strange. All the morning birds were quiet. The forest felt empty, like every living thing had decided to be somewhere else. The air itself seemed thick and wrong, pressing down on us like a heavy blanket. That's when we got the call about the second body. The second victim was found 2 miles north, up near the old logging road. Same thing. Perfect ash outline, nothing else burned, impossible heat, signature. This time, it was Linda Hayes, a local woman who ran illegal trash burns behind her trailer. She'd been warned 4 times this summer about burning during fire restrictions. I stood looking down at what used to be Linda, feeling something cold crawl up my spine despite the heat. 2 people, both with fire violations, both burned in ways that made no scientific sense. "We got a serial killer using some kind of chemical weapon?" Ray asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Maybe," I said, but I didn't believe it. This felt different. Wrong in a way that had nothing to do with human evil. Dr. Patricia Brennan arrived from the state medical examiner's office around noon. She's the best forensic pathologist in Virginia, specializes in fire deaths. If anyone could make sense of this, it would be her. "I've never seen anything like this," she said after examining both scenes. "The combustion started from inside the bodies. Look at these ash patterns, the bones, dissolved first, then the organs, then the skin. That's backwards from any normal fire." "Could be a new type of accelerant," suggested Ray. Dr. Brennan shook her head. "Huh? No chemical signature at all. Whatever did this, it wasn't anything we can detect." That afternoon, while the investigation team worked the scenes, I drove up to talk with Chief Joseph Smokehouse. He's Cherokee, lives on a small reservation about 30 miles east. His people have stories about this mountain going back hundreds of years, and I figured he might know something we didn't. I found him sitting on his porch, working on a piece of wood with a sharp knife. He looked up as I pulled into his driveway, and I could see in his eyes that he already knew why I was there. "Fire spirits are angry," he said before I could even get out of my truck. "Been feeling it for weeks now. Mountain's sick with it." "Fire spirits?" I sat down on his porch steps. "Chief, I need some straight answers. 2 people are dead, burned in ways that don't make sense." He set down his knife and looked at me with those dark, serious eyes. "My grandfather told me stories about this mountain. Long time ago, children died in a fire here. Bad fire, caused by men who didn't respect the flames. Their spirits still walk these hills, looking for justice." "What kind of justice?" "Fire spirits don't like people who are careless with flame. They remember what happened to them, and they don't forgive." He picked up his knife again. "You ever hear of the CCC camp that burned in the 1950 seconds? I had heard something about it, but not many details. 20-some people died, right? 23 children," Chief Smokehouse said. "Died because their supervisor was too lazy to follow safety rules. Set illegal fires to keep warm, didn't maintain the buildings right. When the fire came, those kids had no way out." A chill ran down my back despite the heat. "And you think their spirits are—" "What?" Killing people? I think they're protecting the mountain the only way they know how. He stood up slowly. Mike, you need to be careful. You work with fire every day. You understand its power. But these spirits, they judge people by their respect for flame. They see someone being careless, someone who might cause another tragedy. He shrugged. They stopped them. I drove back toward the mountain as the sun was setting, my mind spinning with what Chief Smokehouse had told me. Spirits of dead children, seeking vengeance for careless fire use. It sounded crazy, but it fit the pattern. Both victims had been repeatedly cited for fire violations. The radio crackled to life as I reached the first crime scene. Mike, we got a problem. Ray's voice came through, tight with stress. Come to the Morrison site, fast. I found Ray and his team standing in a circle around Pete Morrison's ash pile, staring down at something. As I got closer, I saw what had spooked them. The ash had moved. It was still in the shape of a person. But now the arms were stretched out like it was reaching for something. And all around the pile, those little footprints had multiplied. Dozens of them, like a crowd of children, had been dancing around the remains. None of us touched anything, Ray said quietly. We've been standing right here, and it just changed. Dr. Brennan was taking pictures, her hands shaking slightly. The ash is still warm. Temperature's been constant for over 18 hours. That's impossible. As we watched, a small whirlwind started in the center of the ash pile. Not from any wind, the air was completely still. The ash began to swirl and lift, forming shapes in the air. For just a moment, I could swear I saw the outline of a face. A child's face, twisted with rage. Then I heard the laughter again, closer this time, coming from all around us. But there was nothing playful about it now. It sounded hungry, angry, like children who had been waiting too long, for something they desperately wanted. We need to get out of here, I said, backing toward the trucks. Mike, what's going on? Ray demanded. What aren't you telling us? Before I could answer, every piece of electronic equipment we had started going crazy. The thermometers spiked to impossible readings, the cameras began smoking, and the radio burst into static that sounded almost like whispers. That's when I saw them. 3 small figures, standing just at the edge of the forest. Children, but not quite right. They flickered like heat mirages, and their eyes glowed like embers. One pointed directly at me, and I felt a burning sensation on my chest, like someone had pressed a hot iron against my skin. Everyone in the trucks, now! I shouted. We loaded up and got out of there fast, leaving the crime scene behind. As we drove away, I looked back and saw more figures emerging from the forest. Dozens of them, all children, all made of smoke and flame and rage. That night, back at my fire tower, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those burning children staring at me. I kept thinking about what Chief Smokehouse had said about fire spirits judging people by their respect for flame. I dedicated my life to fighting fires, to preventing the kind of tragedy that had killed my family. But what if that wasn't enough? What if the spirit saw something in me that I couldn't see myself? Around midnight, my radio started picking up voices. Children's voices, singing an old song I remembered from when I was young. But the words were wrong, twisted into something about fire and punishment and justice that never comes. I unplugged the radio, but the singing continued. That's when I realized they weren't coming through the radio at all. They were right outside my window. The third body showed up the next morning, found by a jogger on the main trail. This time it was Randy Cochran, who'd been caught burning trash illegally, just last week. Same ash pattern. Same impossible heat. Same untouched surroundings. But this time, there was something extra. Written in the ash around Randy's remains, in a child's handwriting, were the words, "He knew better." I stared at that message while Ray and Dr. Brennan worked the scene. The letters were perfect, like someone had used a stick to write in sand. But ash doesn't work that way. It should have scattered in the wind, collapsed under its own weight. Instead, it held its shape like concrete. Mike, Dr. Brennan called me over to where she was kneeling. Look at this. She was examining something small and white in the ash pile. As I got closer, I realized it was a tooth. A child's tooth, still perfect and clean. That's not from the victim, she said quietly. Randy Cochran was 43 years old. This is from a kid, maybe 8 or 9. My blood went cold. I thought about what Chief Smokehouse had told me, about 23 children who died in a fire 50 years ago. Were we finding pieces of them in these ash piles? There's more, Dr. Brennan continued, pointing to other small objects scattered through the ash. Button from an old-style shirt, piece of a leather shoe, some kind of metal buckle, all from the 1950 seconds, near as I can tell. That afternoon, I drove down to the county library and started digging through old newspaper files. It took me 3 hours to find the story about the CCC campfire, buried in the back pages of the local paper from October 1954. Tragedy strikes local camp, 23 dead in fire. The article was short, clinical. A fire had swept through a civilian Conservation Corps camp during an early cold snap. The supervisor, Harold Brennan, said it was a tragic accident caused by unseasonably cold weather and an old heating system. 23 young men, ages 16 to 19, had died in their sleep from smoke inhalation. But there was something else, a follow-up story from a week later that made my hands shake as I read it. Campfire survivor claims negligence. A young woman named Rebecca Turner, who worked as a cook at the camp, claimed the fire was preventable. She said Supervisor Brennan had been setting illegal warming fires around the camp because he was too cheap to fix the proper heating system. The buildings were old and poorly maintained, with blocked fire exits and broken smoke alarms. When she tried to report the violations, Brennan threatened to have her fired. The story ended abruptly, with a note that Miss Turner had left the area and could not be reached for further comment. I copied everything and drove back up the mountain as the sun was setting. The forest felt different now, charged with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. Even the air seemed to shimmer with heat, despite the approaching night. At my tower, I found Ray waiting for me, looking worried. "We got problems, Mike, big ones." He held up a list. I checked the Dawn fire violation records like you asked. In the past 2 months, we've cited 47 people for illegal fires or safety violations. 3 are dead. That leaves 44 potential targets. Targets? Come on, Mike. You see the pattern same as me. Something's hunting people who break fire safety rules. Question is, what do we do about it? Before I could answer, my radio crackled to life. It was Tommy Walsh, the guy who'd found the first body. "Mike, you need to get down to the campground fast. We got a situation." The Paradise Valley campground was about 5 miles down the mountain, officially closed due to fire restrictions. But when Ray and I got there, we found 6 teenagers who'd snuck in anyway. They had a big illegal campfire going, completely ignoring the burn ban. What scared me wasn't the fire itself. It was what was dancing around it. The ash children were everywhere, dozens of them, flickering in and out of visibility like heat mirages. They circled the campfire in a strange, hypnotic dance, their eyes glowing brighter with each step. The teenagers couldn't see them, but I could tell they felt something. They kept looking over their shoulders, jumpy and nervous. "Oh, hell," Ray whispered beside me. "Mike, what are those things?" Before I could answer, one of the teenagers, a kid maybe 17 years old, walked too close to the fire. An ash child reached out and touched his arm. The boy screamed and fell backward, his sleeve smoking. Where the spirit had touched him, there was a perfect handprint burned into his skin. "Everyone away from the fire!" I shouted, running toward them. "Now!" The teenagers scattered, but it was too late. The ash children were getting more solid, more real. I could see their faces clearly now, young faces, but old eyes full of anger and pain. One of them, a girl who couldn't have been more than 10 when she died, stepped directly into our path. "You let them burn," she said, her voice like the crackle of flames. "Just like he did. Just like they all do." "I'm trying to stop them," I said, surprised that I could actually talk to her. "That's my job." "Your job?" The girl laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. "Where were you when we burned? Where were you when Harold Brennan let us die?" Around us, the other ash children were closing in. The teenagers had run to their cars, but their engines wouldn't start. The spirits weren't done with them yet. "That was 50 years ago," Ray said, his voice shaking. "Those kids weren't even born then." "Fire doesn't forget," another spirit spoke up, this one a boy with half his face burned away. "Fire remembers every careless hand, every ignored rule, every preventable death. The girl pointed at the smoldering campfire. They came here knowing the danger, posted signs everywhere, warnings on the radio. But they came anyway, because they thought the rules didn't apply to them. So you're going to kill them? We're going to teach them, the boy said. The same lesson we learned. That's when I realized this was bigger than just a few random deaths. These spirits weren't just targeting individuals, they were building up to something. The question was, what and how could I stop it? The ash children began to circle us, their forms becoming more solid with each step. I felt heat radiating from them, so intense it was like standing next to a blast furnace. There's a way to stop this, I said desperately. Tell me what you want. Justice, they all said together, their voices creating a sound like a roaring fire. Justice for what Harold Brennan did. Justice for every careless flame that followed. Brennan's dead, has been for years. The girl smiled, and her teeth glowed like coals. But his son isn't. That's when I understood. Harold Brennan, Jr. He was the current state fire safety inspector. The man responsible for enforcing the very rules his father had ignored. And according to the files I'd seen, he'd been covering up violations all over the region, just like his father had 50 years ago. Where is he? I asked. Coming, the spirit said. Coming to cover up these deaths, just like Daddy taught him. But this time, we'll be waiting. The ash children began to fade back into the smoke and shadows, but their message was clear. They were planning something big, and it was going to happen soon. Ray and I helped the teenagers get their cars started and escorted them off the mountain. But as we drove away, I could see the glow of supernatural fire spreading through the forest behind us. The spirits were gathering their strength, and when Harold Brennan Jr. arrived, they'd be ready for him. The only question was whether I'd be able to stop them, or if I even should. Harold Brennan Jr. arrived the next morning with a team of federal investigators looking to contain the situation before it got out of the nest. And I knew him by reputation, a slick politician type who'd taken over his father's job and spent 30 years covering up inconvenient truths. He was exactly what I expected. Expensive suit, fake smile, and the kind of confidence that comes from never facing real consequences. Ranger Ashburner, he said, shaking my hand with a grip that was too firm and lasted too long. Heard you've been having some unusual fire deaths. Don't worry, we'll get this sorted out quickly and quietly. The word quietly made my stomach turn. I'd seen enough cover-ups to know what that meant. Ray and I showed him the crime scenes, watching as his team took their own samples and photos. Brennan kept checking his watch and making phone calls, like he had somewhere more important to be. Looks like a chemical weapon to me, he announced after a quick look at the evidence. Probably some kind of military test gone wrong. We'll handle it from here. What about the patterns? I asked. The fact that all the victims had fire violations. Brennan's smile got tighter. Coincidence. Rural areas, lots of people burn things illegally. Bound to be some overlap. That's when Dr. Brennan showed him the children's belongings we'd found in the ash. The old buttons, the leather shoe fragments, the 1,950 seconds artifacts that made no sense. For just a second, Harold Brennan Jr.'s mask slipped. I saw fear in his eyes, the kind of fear that comes from old family secrets. Probably contamination from old dump sites, he said quickly. Mountains are full of that kind of debris. But I could tell he knew better. This was about his father, about the campfire in 1954, about 23 young people who died because Harold Brennan Sr. was too lazy and cheap to follow safety rules. That night, I was working late in my tower when I heard vehicles coming up the mountain road. Through my binoculars, I could see Harold Brennan Jr. and two other men in dark suits. They were heading to the crime scenes. They were going to the old CCC campsite. I grabbed my gear and followed them on foot, staying in the shadows. The old camp was about 2 miles north of my tower, in a valley that most people avoided. The buildings had been torn down decades ago, but you could still see the foundation stones if you knew where to look. Brennan and his men had brought shovels and some kind of chemical equipment. As I watched from the tree line, they started digging in what looked like a random spot, but I realized it wasn't random at all. They were digging where the old dormitory had been, where the 23 young men had died. This should have been cleaned up years ago, one of the federal agents said. My father thought it was better to let sleeping dogs lie, Brennan replied. Turns out he was wrong. They pulled something out of the ground, a metal box, old and corroded. When Brennan opened it, I saw papers inside, documents, probably from the Backet. Original investigation. These get destroyed tonight, Brennan said, along with anything else that might connect the current deaths to what happened here. That's when the Ash children appeared. They came out of the forest like smoke given form, dozens of them surrounding the three men. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds, and the air filled with the sound of children singing an old lullaby. The federal agents pulled their guns, but what do you shoot at smoke and memory? Harold Brennan, the little girl I'd spoken to before, stepped into the circle of light from their flashlights. Son of Harold Brennan. You carry his name, his job, his guilt. Brennan dropped the metal box, papers scattering in the wind. This isn't real. Stress hallucinations, chemical exposure, something. We are very real, the burned boy said, moving closer. As real as the fire that killed us. As real as your father's lies. The spirits began to circle the three men, their forms becoming more solid with each step. I could feel the heat from where I was hidden, 50 yards away. Your father let us die, the girl continued. Illegal fires, broken equipment, blocked exits. We burned alive while he slept safe in his heated cabin. That was 50 years ago, Brennan shouted. I wasn't even born. But you followed his path, the boy said, covering up violations, ignoring safety rules, protecting the guilty. How many have died because you looked the other way? I realized this was my chance. While the spirits were focused on Brennan, I could retrieve those documents, get proof of what really happened in 1954. Evidence that might finally bring justice for those dead children. I crept closer, staying low behind the old foundation stones. The papers were scattered everywhere, some already starting to smolder from the supernatural heat. I grabbed as many as I could, stuffing them inside my jacket. That's when I saw the signature on one of the reports. Harold Brennan Sr., Fire Safety Inspector. A confession, written in his own hand, admitting that he had ignored safety violations to save money, had set illegal warming fires that spread to the dormitory, had blocked fire exits to keep unauthorized personnel out. He'd known exactly what caused the fire, and he'd covered it up for 50 years. Looking for something, Mike? I turned to find Harold Brennan Jr. pointing a gun at me, his face twisted with desperation and rage. Those documents are classified federal evidence, he said. Hand them over. These kids deserve justice, I said, clutching the papers. They've been waiting 50 years for someone to tell the truth. The truth? Brennan laughed bitterly. The truth is that my father made a mistake, and I've spent my whole career making sure it never happened again. You think I wanted to follow in his footsteps? You think I enjoy covering up his mess? Around us, the Ash children had gone, silent, watching and waiting. Then stop, I said. Let the truth come out. Give these spirits what they need to rest. I can't. Brennan's hand was shaking on the gun. There's too much at stake, too many careers built on keeping this quiet. My father may have been guilty, but a lot of innocent people will go down if this comes out now. That's when I understood. It wasn't just about the 1,954 fire anymore. It was about decades of cover-ups, of violations ignored, of safety rules bent for political convenience. The supernatural deaths were just the tip of the iceberg. How many people have died because of your cover-ups? I asked. Before he could answer, the Ash children moved. Not toward him, but toward me. They surrounded us both, their eyes burning brighter than stars. Choose, the little girl said, looking directly at me. Justice for us, or mercy for him? You cannot have both. I looked at Harold Brennan Jr., sweating and desperate, holding a gun on me to protect his father's lies. Then I looked at the burned children, victims of negligence and greed who'd been denied justice for half a century. The choice was easier than I expected. I choose justice, I said, and threw the documents into the air between us. The papers burst into supernatural flame, but instead of being destroyed, they began to glow. Every word, every signature, every covered-up detail became visible in letters of fire, hanging in the air for everyone to see. Harold Brennan Jr. screamed and pulled the trigger, but his gun wouldn't fire. The Ash children had grown solid now, real enough to affect the physical world, and they weren't going to let him silence the truth anymore. Your father's confession, the girl said, pointing at the burning words. Your continued cover-up. All of it witnessed, all of it recorded. What do you want? Brennan sobbed, falling to his knees. Justice, they all said together. Justice and an end to the lies. Harold Brennan Jr. didn't burn that night. The Ash children could have killed him easily, but they chose something else instead. They chose to let him live with the truth. The supernatural fire that consumed the documents also somehow transmitted their contents to every media outlet and government office in 3 states. By morning, the 1954 cover-up was front-page news, along with evidence of 30 years of continuing violations and ignored safety rules. Brennan was arrested before noon, charged with falsifying federal documents and criminal negligence in 17 fire-related deaths. The investigation would eventually bring down half the state fire safety department and lead to the largest reform of fire codes in Virginia history. But more importantly, the truth was finally out. 23 young men had died in a preventable fire, and their story would no longer be hidden. That night, I went back to the old campsite one last time. The Ash children were there, but they looked different now. Peaceful. Their eyes no longer burned with rage, and when they moved, it was like dancing instead of hunting. "Thank you," the little girl said, though she looked less little now. More like the teenager she would have been if she'd lived. "We can rest now." "What happens to the mountain?" I asked. "We'll still be here," the boy said, his burned face somehow beautiful in the moonlight. "But we'll be guardians now instead of hunters, watching over the forest, protecting it from careless fire." They began to fade as the sun came up, dissolving into morning mist and golden light. But I knew they weren't really gone. I could feel their presence in every tree, every blade of grass, every breath of wind across the mountain. The wildfire danger that had threatened the region all summer suddenly broke. The supernatural heat that had been building for weeks dissipated, replaced by a cool breeze that carried the scent of rain. By afternoon, clouds were building on the horizon. I kept working as a ranger for another 10 years after that, but my job changed. I became something like a bridge between the fire service and the Cherokee Nation, learning traditional fire management techniques that had been forgotten for generations. Chief Smokehouse taught me how to read the mountain's moods, how to sense when the fire spirits were restless, how to keep the balance between human needs and natural law. The Ash children kept their word. They became guardians of the forest, appearing to warn hikers away from dangerous areas, guiding lost campers to safety, and making sure that anyone who entered their domain showed proper respect for the power of fire. Sometimes, on clear mornings, when the light hits the forest just right, I can still see them playing in the meadows where flowers now grow where their dormitory once stood. They're children again in those moments, laughing and running, and free of the anger that bound them for 50 years. I live in the tower still, keeping watch over their mountain. The nightmares about my family's fire have finally stopped, replaced by dreams of children dancing in fields of light. I understand now that my survival wasn't random, wasn't guilt to carry. It was purpose. Fire is alive. Every firefighter knows that. But the Ash children taught me that fire has memory too. It remembers every life lost to negligence, every safety rule ignored, every preventable tragedy. That memory burns eternal. Seeking justice, seeking balance, seeking the respect that fire demands and deserves. Now I tend fires the Cherokee way, with ceremony and reverence and understanding, because the spirits of those lost children are still watching, still protecting these mountains from the careless flames of the living. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear them singing. My name is Tom Nightingale, and I've been a park ranger for 12 years now. I work the Mount Pleasant area in Jefferson National Forest, up in Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains. People think being a ranger is all about helping lost hikers and putting out campfires, but most of my job is listening. Listening to the forest, to what the animals are telling me, to the sounds that don't belong. I'm good at listening because I have to be. Lost most of my hearing in my left ear during a mining accident years back, before I got smart and went back to school for my biology degree. The accident made my right ear work overtime, picking up sounds other people miss. My wife Sarah used to tease me about it. She'd whisper something from across the room, and I'd hear every word. Sarah's been gone 3 years now, car accident on a rainy night coming back from her sister's place. I don't talk about it much, but living alone in these mountains gives you too much time to think. Just me and Echo now. That's my rescue dog, part German Shepherd, part something smarter than me. Echo showed up at my cabin door 2 winters ago, half-starved and shaking. Figured we were both broken enough to help each other heal. The cabin sits about 18 miles from the nearest town, right where the cell towers can't reach. I like it that way. Got my radio for emergencies, my research equipment for work, and enough books to last through the long winters. I study animal sounds. How elk call to their herds, how bears warn their cubs, how the forest talks to itself. It's peaceful work, usually. But this November started different. The first thing I noticed was Echo. He's always been a calm dog, steady as they come. But 3 weeks ago, he stopped sleeping through the night. Started pacing around the cabin, whining at the windows, hackles up like something was prowling outside. When I'd check with my flashlight, there was never anything there. Just the usual November fog rolling through the valleys. Then the birds stopped singing. I know that sounds like something from a bad movie, but it's true. One day, I'm hearing the normal morning chorus, 1B6, cardinals, blue jays, woodpeckers doing their thing. The next day, nothing. Complete silence except for the wind through the trees. In 12 years up here, I've never seen wildlife just leave. Not without a reason. My job involves setting up acoustic monitoring stations throughout the forest. Little boxes with microphones and recording equipment that capture sound 24 hours a day. We use the data to track animal populations, monitor mating seasons, that sort of thing. Scientific stuff that makes sense on paper and keeps the university funding coming in. The recordings from the past 3 weeks don't make sense. I first noticed it while reviewing the data from Station 7, up on the North Ridge. Mixed in with the usual wind and tree sounds was something else. Something that sounded almost like singing, but not bird songs or the kind of calls animals make. Human singing, a woman's voice, soft and sad like she was mourning something. The weird part was the timestamps. The voice showed up on recordings at 3:17 a.m., 3:17 p.m., always exactly 17 minutes past the hour. And it was always the same melody, though I couldn't make out words. The songs lasted exactly 4 minutes and 23 seconds, then stopped mid-note, like someone had turned off a radio. I figured maybe someone was camping illegally in the area. Wouldn't be the first time hikers decided to make their own rules about where to pitch a tent. But when I hiked up to Station 7 to investigate, there was no sign of recent human activity. No footprints, no fire circles, no trash, nothing. Echo wouldn't even get close to that area. Smart dog like him, I usually trust his instincts. But I had to do my job, so I left him tied to a tree about 50 yards back and went to check the equipment myself. Everything was working perfectly. No mechanical problems, no interference from other electronics, just that voice, clear as anything, singing its sad song to an empty forest. That night, I called my friend Dr. Elizabeth Harper down at the university. Liz is an expert in acoustic phenomena, ILA Shay. If anyone could explain what I was hearing, it would be her. Tom, you're probably dealing with pareidolia, she said over the crackling phone line. It's when your brain interprets random sounds as familiar patterns, like seeing faces in clouds or hearing voices in static. I've been doing this for 12 years, Liz. I know the difference between hearing things and recording them. There was a pause. Send me the files. I'll take a look. I uploaded the recordings to our shared server and went to bed. Echo spent the whole night pacing again, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching the cabin. Twice I got up to check the windows, and twice I saw nothing but fog and darkness. The next morning, Liz called me back. She sounded different, shaky. Tom, where exactly did these recordings come from? Station 7, North Ridge, about 4,000 feet up. Why? I ran them through spectrographic analysis. The voice, it's hitting frequencies outside the normal human range. And Tom, there's something else. The melody matches a traditional Irish keening song, a mourning song for the dead. That's when I knew I was dealing with something that didn't belong in any of my training manuals. The morning after Liz's call, I decided to set up additional monitoring equipment around Station 7. If something strange was happening up there, I needed better documentation. Scientific method, right? Observe, record, analyze. Same approach that got me through graduate school. I loaded my truck with portable recording gear, extra batteries, and my emergency kit. Echo jumped in the passenger seat without his usual enthusiasm. He kept looking back toward the cabin, like he wanted to stay home. Come on, boy. Whatever's out there, we'll face it together. The drive up to Mount Pleasant takes about 40 minutes on the Forest Service roads. Narrow, winding paths that weren't built for comfort. Halfway up, Echo started whimpering. Not his usual car sickness sounds. Something deeper, more worried. I pulled over and checked him out, but he seemed fine physically, just scared. The fog was thicker than usual that morning, turning the familiar forest into something alien. Trees appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Distances became impossible to judge. I've driven these roads thousands of times, but I had to use GPS to make sure I was headed in the right direction. When I reached the Station 7 area, I parked and started hiking in with my equipment. The forest was dead quiet, except for our footsteps on wet leaves. No birds, no squirrels, no insects. Even the wind seemed muted. Echo stayed close to my legs, which wasn't like him at all. Usually he'd be ranging ahead, investigating smells, being a dog. I set up 3 new recording stations in a triangle around the original equipment, each about 100 yards apart. If the voice was coming from a specific location, triangulation would help me pinpoint it. Basic acoustic science. The work took most of the morning. By the time I finished, the fog had lifted enough to see the ridgeline clearly. Beautiful country, the kind that makes you understand why people fight to protect wild places. But something felt wrong about it, like the landscape was holding its breath. I was packing up my tools when Echo started growling. Not his normal "there's a squirrel" growl. This was deeper, more serious, the kind of sound he made the one time we encountered a black bear near the cabin. His hackles were up, ears forward, staring at something in the tree line about 50 yards away. I followed his gaze, but didn't see anything unusual. Just rhododendron bushes and mountain laurel, thick enough to hide a deer or maybe a person. "What is it, boy?" Echo whined and pressed against my legs. Then I heard it, singing, the same melody from the recordings. But this time it was live, happening right there in front of me. A woman's voice, clear and beautiful and infinitely sad. The words weren't in English. Dialect sounded like Irish Gaelic maybe, or some other old language I didn't recognize. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Not from the bushes where Echo was looking, but from the air itself, like the forest was singing. I pulled out my portable recorder and started taping. My hands were shaking, whether from excitement or fear, I couldn't tell. This was it. Real-time documentation of whatever was happening up here. The song lasted exactly 4 minutes and 23 seconds, just like on the station recordings. Then it stopped mid-note, and the silence that followed was deeper than before. Even the normal forest sounds, wind through trees, distant creek water, seemed muted. Echo relaxed slightly, but he kept watching the tree line. I checked my recorder. Perfect quality audio, clear as a studio recording. Whatever was singing had a trained voice, someone who knew how to project and control their breathing. But there was still nobody there. I spent the next hour searching the area where the voice had seemed strongest. No footprints in the soft earth, no broken branches or disturbed vegetation. No sign that anyone had been there recently, maybe ever. That's when I found the first one. Hidden under a pile of leaves and branches, carefully arranged to look natural, was a small wooden cross. Hand-carved, weathered with age, with initials scratched into the wood. M.O. 1863. Below the cross, someone had placed fresh wildflowers. Mountain laurel blossoms and late autumn asters, picked recently enough that they hadn't wilted yet. I photographed everything, marked the GPS, coordinates, and continued searching. 50 yards away, I found another cross. This one marked F.B. 1863. Same careful camouflage, same fresh flowers. 2 graves, both from 1863. Civil War era. But Jefferson National Forest had detailed historical surveys, and there were no records of burials in this area. These were unofficial graves, hidden graves. Someone was tending them. The drive back to the cabin took longer than usual, because I kept stopping to check my rearview mirror. Silly, since the nearest vehicle was probably 20 miles away, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. Echo spent the whole trip looking out the back window, alert and worried. At the cabin, I uploaded my new recordings to send to Liz, then started researching the initials from the crosses. The National Archives database showed thousands of Civil War casualties, but I narrowed the search to Virginia units active in 1863. Found him first, Fighting Bear, Cherokee warrior who served as a scout for Confederate forces. Killed in action the 12th of November 1863 at a skirmish near what was now Mount Pleasant. No body recovered. The woman took longer to find. Moira O'Brien, Irish immigrant, age 23. Not a soldier, but her death was listed in civilian casualty reports from the same date. Cause of death, exposure and grief. Whatever that meant, I was still reading when my radio crackled to life. Ranger Station, this is Sheriff Ramsey. Got a welfare check request for Tom Nightingale. You copy? I grabbed the handset. This is Nightingale. I'm fine, Sheriff. What's the concern? Got a call from Dr. Harper down at the university. Says she's been trying to reach you for 2 days and you're not answering your phone. 2 days? I checked my calendar. It was Thursday afternoon. Last I remembered, it was Tuesday morning when I went up to Station 7. I'd lost 2 days. Sheriff Dale Ramsey showed up at my cabin an hour after the radio call. Big man with kind eyes and a slow way of talking that came from growing up in these mountains. His family had been living in the area for 6 generations, which made him practically an expert on local history and folklore. Tom, you look like hell, he said, accepting a cup of coffee and settling into my kitchen chair. When's the last time you slept? Honest answer? I couldn't remember. The past few days felt like a blur of hiking, recording, researching. But apparently I'd been doing it for longer than I thought. Dale, what do you know about the Civil War history up on Mount Pleasant? His expression changed, got more serious. Depends what you're asking about. The official stuff or the stories my grandmother used to tell? Both. He sipped his coffee and looked out the window toward the mountains. Official records show a small engagement in November 1863. Confederate scouting party got caught by Union cavalry. Dozen men killed, maybe more. Bodies never recovered because a Deecher blizzard hit right after. What about the stories? Well, now that's different. Dale leaned back in his chair. My grandmother used to say there was a Cherokee warrior working with the Confederates. Good tracker. Knew these mountains better than anyone. Had himself an Irish girlfriend, lived in a cabin up near where your Station 7 is now. Echo, who'd been lying by the fire, suddenly stood up and started pacing. His ears were forward, listening to something I couldn't hear yet. Dale continued. Story goes, the warrior promised to come back after the war. Girl waited and waited, through winter and into spring. When word came that he'd been killed, she couldn't handle it. She died of grief? In a manner of speaking, grandmother always said she died calling for him, singing these old Irish songs for the dead, and that she never stopped. Echo whined and moved to the window. Outside, fog was rolling in thick, even though it was only mid-afternoon. Dale, I've been hearing singing up on that mountain. Woman's voice, Irish-sounding songs. The sheriff's cup stopped halfway to his mouth. You been hearing the morning woman? Before I could ask what he meant, Echo started barking. Not his normal bark, something desperate and warning. Both Dale and I went to the window. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, about 30 yards from the cabin, was a woman. She wore a long dress that looked like it belonged in an old photograph. Dark hair hung loose around her shoulders. Even through the fog, I could see that she was beautiful. But there was something wrong with the picture. Like she was slightly transparent, or like I was seeing her through water. She was singing the same melody I'd been recording, but now I could hear it clearly. Words in Irish Gaelic, sad and haunting. A funeral song, a song for the dead. Jesus Christ, Dale whispered. He'd gone pale. I grabbed my portable recorder from the kitchen table. You see her too? Yeah, I see her. That was a relief. For the past few days, I'd started wondering about my own sanity. The woman, Moira, had to be Moira, raised one hand toward the cabin. Not waving, more like pointing. Her mouth never stopped moving with the song, but her eyes were fixed on mine. Even at that distance, I could see the sadness in them. Bottomless grief that made my chest ache just looking at her. Echo's barking got more frantic. He was scratching at the door now, wanting out, but also wanting to run. Fight or flight, can't decide which. Don't go out there, Dale said quietly. My grandmother always said the mourning woman only appears when someone's about to die. The singing stopped. Moira lowered her hand, took one step backward, and disappeared. Not like she walked away, more like she faded out, becoming part of the fog until there was nothing left but empty clearing. Echo stopped barking and whined, pressing against my legs. Who's going to die? I asked. Dale was already reaching for his radio. I need to check on the elderly folks living up this way. Mrs. McDonald, the Hendricks, couple others. It took us an hour to make the rounds. Mrs. Iris McDonald lived closest, about 5 miles down the mountain in a house that had been in her family for 8 decades. 87 years old, sharp as a tack, with the kind of mountain wisdom that came from watching the world change around you. We found her sitting on her front porch, rocking slowly and staring up toward Mount Pleasant. Mrs. McDonald, Dale called as we pulled up. You doing all right? She smiled, but it was a sad smile. Oh, I'm fine, Sheriff. Just listening to the singing. My blood went cold. You heard it too? Been hearing it for 3 days now. She's calling for someone, you know, calling them home. Dale and I exchanged looks. Who's she calling, Mrs. McDonald? The old woman's rocking chair creaked as she leaned forward. Well, that depends. Could be calling for her lost love. Could be warning about someone else fixing to pass. The mourning woman, she serves both purposes. You know about her? I asked. Child, my grandmother taught me about her when I was knee-high. O'Brien women have been hearing that voice for more than 100 years. We're the ones supposed to help her. Help her how, Mrs. McDonald stood up slowly, her joints protesting. Come inside, time you learned the whole story. Her kitchen was like stepping back in time. Wood-burning stove, hand-pumped well water, photographs on the walls showing generations of the same family in the same house. She put on a kettle for tea and gestured for us to sit at a table that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of oak. Moira O'Brien was my great-great-grandmother's cousin, she began. Came over from Ireland in 1858, young and full of dreams. Ended up falling in love with a Cherokee man named Fighting Bear. Beautiful couple, from what I heard. But love across cultures wasn't easy in those days. The kettle whistled, and she poured water over loose tea leaves. The ritual gave her time to think about her words. When the war started, Fighting Bear felt obligated to serve. Cherokee had complicated reasons for picking sides, but he chose the Confederates. Promised Moira he'd come back when it was over. But he didn't, I said. No. Killed in a skirmish right there on Mount Pleasant, November 12th, 1863. Moira, she couldn't accept it. Kept waiting, kept calling for him with the old songs her mother taught her. Songs to guide the dead home. Mrs. McDonald poured tea into 3 mismatched cups. She died that winter, still calling. And she never stopped. Dale leaned forward. Why is she appearing now? Tom's been hearing her for weeks. The old woman looked at me with sharp eyes. Because something's wrong up there. The balance is broken. Moira can only appear when there's great sadness, or when someone needs warning. If she's been singing for weeks. She didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. Something bad was coming. How do we help her? I asked. First, you need to understand what she's really doing. She's not just mourning her own loss. She's trying to protect people. The songs are warnings, but only if you know how to listen. Mrs. McDonald went to an old chest in the corner and pulled out a leather-bound journal. The pages were yellow with age, filled with handwriting and faded ink. This belonged to my great-great-grandmother. She wrote down everything Moira told her family over the years. Names, dates, warnings. Every time someone heard the singing, someone in these mountains died within a day or two. She opened the journal and showed us page after page of entries. Names I didn't recognize, but dates going back more than a century. And at the bottom of each page, a note, warning, heeded, or warning, ignored. What's the difference? Dale asked. When families listened to the warning and prepared for loss, gathered together, said goodbyes, made peace with dying, the passing was gentle, natural. When they ignored the singing, she flipped to a different section. These pages had different notations. Found in woods, disappeared during storm, accident on mountain road. She tries to help, Mrs. McDonald said quietly. But she can't stop death. She can only warn about it and maybe make it easier. I thought about Sarah, about the rainy night 3 years ago. Had Moira been singing then? Had there been warnings I was too stubborn or too rational to hear? Mrs. McDonald, I said, who is she singing for now? The old woman closed the journal and looked directly at me. That's what you need to find out. But Tom, be careful. Something's got her more upset than I've ever seen. 3 days of constant singing means more than just one person passing. Something bigger is coming. That night, I couldn't sleep. Echo had finally settled down, but every sound in the forest made me alert. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again, the singing, floating down from Mount Pleasant, closer this time, like Moira was moving down the mountain toward populated areas. I grabbed my recorder and stepped onto the cabin porch. The fog was so thick I could barely see the tree line, but the voice was crystal clear. And this time, I could make out some of the words. She was singing names. Mrs. McDonald's name, Dale Ramsey's name, my name. And woven through it all, like a lament, one name repeated over and over. Sarah, Sarah, Sarah. I didn't wait for morning. Threw on my clothes, grabbed my emergency kit, and loaded Echo into the truck. If Moira was singing our names, we needed to get to the people on her list before whatever was coming arrived. First stop was Mrs. McDonald's house. Found her already awake, sitting at her kitchen table with the old journal open in front of her. I heard her singing, she said before I could speak. Singing my name, and yours, and the sheriff's. We need to get you somewhere safe. She smiled that sad smile again. Child, I'm 87 years old. I've been expecting this call for years now, but you still have work to do. What work? Helping her finish what she started. She's been trying to warn people for more than a century, but she's getting weaker. The mountain's changing. Too much noise and development. Her voice is getting lost. Mrs. McDonald stood up and walked to the window. There's something else, though. Something that's got her singing multiple names at once. What? Her love. Fighting Bear. His spirit's been trapped since 1863. Can't move on because he never got to say goodbye. Moira's been calling him all these years, but something's blocking him from coming to her. She turned back to me. If they don't reunite, soon, the sadness is going to kill them both. And when a spirit dies the second time, it takes other souls with it. The radio on my belt crackled. Dale's voice, urgent and scared. Tom, you need to get up here. Found something at the Hendricks place. The Hendricks lived about 3 miles up the mountain from Mrs. McDonald. Older couple, kept to themselves, made their living selling crafts to tourists. When we arrived, Dale's patrol car was parked crooked in their driveway, like he'd stopped fast. Found him standing in their backyard, staring at something in the trees. They're gone, he said without turning around. House is empty, but their car's still here. Coffee was still warm when I arrived. Gone where? He pointed to the tree line. Follow me. But Tom, prepare yourself. We hiked about 100 yards into the woods, following a path that shouldn't have existed. The trees were arranged wrong, like they'd grown in straight lines instead of naturally. The ground was covered with leaves, but they were all the same color. Brown and gold and red in perfect patterns. At the center of the strange grove, we found them. Mr. and Mrs. Hendricks, sitting peacefully against a large oak tree. They looked like they were sleeping, except for the expressions on their faces. Complete peace. Like they'd found the answer to every question they'd ever had. They weren't breathing. Jesus, Dale whispered. What happened to them? I knelt down and checked for pulse, signs of life. Nothing. But their skin was still warm, and there were no marks of violence. No signs of struggle. They'd just stopped. Echo whined and backed away from the grove. Smart dog. That's when I noticed the flowers. Scattered around the base of the oak tree were fresh wildflowers. Mountain laurel and autumn asters, arranged in careful patterns. The same flowers I'd found at the hidden graves on Mount Pleasant. She's collecting them, I said. What? Moira. She's not just warning about death anymore. She's gathering people. Look at their faces, Dale. They're happy. And they were. Both elderly people wore expressions of perfect contentment, like they'd been given the most beautiful gift in the world before they died. My radio crackled again. Different voice this time, emergency dispatcher. All units, we have multiple missing persons reports in the Mount Pleasant area. Elderly residents, last seen yesterday evening. Families are requesting immediate search and rescue. Dale and I looked at each other. How many missing? Dale asked into his radio. 7 confirmed so far, all over age 70, all living in isolated mountain properties. 7 people, plus the Hendricks maid 9, all taken in one night. Tom, Dale said quietly, this isn't normal death. Something's hunting. We hiked back to his patrol car and started making rounds to the other isolated properties. Found the same thing. At each location, houses empty but undisturbed, vehicles still parked, fresh coffee or half-eaten meals left behind. No signs of violence or forced entry. The people had just walked away from their lives and into the forest. At the 4th house, we found something different. Scratch marks in the dirt near the back door, leading into the woods. But not animal tracks, human fingernails, like someone had been dragged and tried to fight back. This one didn't go willingly, Dale said. We followed the trail into the trees. It led uphill, toward Mount Pleasant, through terrain that would be difficult for elderly people to navigate. After about a mile, the scratch marks stopped, replaced by normal footprints walking calmly in the same direction. Whatever had taken the people could change their minds about resisting. The trail ended at a clearing I'd never seen before, despite 12 years of hiking these mountains. In the center stood an enormous white oak, bigger around than my cabin. Its branches reached up into the fog so high I couldn't see the top. At the base of the tree sat 7 people. They were alive, but barely, eyes closed, breathing slow and shallow, like they were in some kind of trance. Fresh flowers covered the ground around them in intricate patterns. And standing behind the tree, barely visible through the mist, was Moira. She was more solid now, more real-looking than before. The sadness in her face had been replaced by something else. Determination, purpose. When she saw us, she stepped forward and spoke. Her voice was clear, with a musical Irish accent. You came. I was hoping you would. Dale reached for his gun, but I put a hand on his arm. Wait. Let her talk. These people, Moira gestured to the elderly folks sitting around the tree. They're dying anyway. Cancer, heart disease, organs failing. I can see death coming for them, and it's not peaceful. Not natural. She moved closer, and I could see, through her, to the trees behind. But if they pass while connected to this place, connected to Fighting Bear's spirit, their deaths can give him strength to break free. And once he's free, you can both move on, I finished. Yes, but there's a problem. Her beautiful face crumpled with fresh grief. I'm not strong enough to hold them all. The life is draining out of me too fast. I need someone to anchor me to this world, while Fighting Bear gathers enough strength. Dale shifted nervously. What kind of anchor? Moira's eyes fixed on mine. Someone who understands loss. Someone who's already touched by death but still has enough life to share. She meant me. Of course, she meant me. If I help you, I said, what happens to me? I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe you join us. Maybe you become something in between. Her voice got softer. Your wife, Sarah, she's been trying to reach you for 3 years. If you help us, you might finally hear her voice. The mention of Sarah hit me like a physical blow. Echo whined and pressed against my legs, sensing my pain. Sarah's dead. Death isn't the end, Tom. You know that now. You've been hearing my voice, seeing me, understanding that love doesn't stop just because the heart stops beating. Moira knelt down in front of me. Help me save Fighting Bear, and I'll make sure you and Sarah can say goodbye properly. Dale grabbed my shoulder. Tom, don't listen to her. This is how people disappear in these mountains and never come back. But I was already reaching out to touch Moira's hand. The moment our skin made contact, the world changed. The mountain exploded with sound. Not noise, music. Every tree, every rock, every blade of grass was singing in harmony. I could hear the mountain's heartbeat, feel the ancient Cherokee spirits who'd been sleeping in the stone, sensed the pain of the soldiers who died there more than a century ago. And through it all, fighting. Bear's voice, calling out in languages that predated English by thousands of years. Moira's hand in mine felt solid and warm, not ghostly anymore. The 7 elderly people around the oak tree began to glow with soft light, their life force flowing into the grove like water into a reservoir. But something was wrong. I could feel myself being drained too, my own life energy being pulled toward the enormous oak tree. Moira had been honest. She didn't know what would happen to me. Tom? Dale's voice sounded distant, like he was calling from the bottom of a well. Tom, fight it. I tried to let go of Moira's hand, but our fingers were locked together by something stronger than muscle. Around us, the fog began to swirl in patterns, and I could see shapes moving in the mist. Other spirits, other people who'd been taken by the mountain over the years. They were all looking at me with the same expression, hope. Don't be afraid, Moira whispered. Fighting Bear is almost here. Can you feel him? I could. Something powerful was rising up through the earth, through the roots of the great oak, gathering strength from the life energy of the dying people. But it wasn't malevolent. It felt grateful. The tree began to glow, soft white light emanating from its bark. The glow spread outward, touching each of the elderly people, and their faces became peaceful. No longer the blank expression of trance, but genuine contentment. One of them, Mrs. Patterson, who lived about 10 miles north, Hios, opened her eyes and smiled at me. Thank you, young man, she said clearly. I've been in so much pain. This is better. Then she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and simply stopped. Her life force flowed into the tree like visible light. One by one, the others followed. Peaceful passings, natural and gentle, the way death was supposed to be. Their energy joined the growing power in the oak, and with each addition, I could feel Fighting Bear getting stronger. Finally, he broke through. The Cherokee warrior materialized beside the tree, tall and strong, wearing traditional clothing from the 1860 seconds. His face was kind but marked by over a century of separation and longing. When he saw Moira, his expression transformed into pure joy. They ran to each other and embraced, and the mountains sang with happiness. But I was still connected to them, still being drained. My legs gave out and I fell to my knees, feeling my life force flowing away. That's when I heard Sarah's voice. Tom, look at me. She was standing beside Echo, one hand resting on my dog's head. Beautiful as ever, wearing the blue dress she'd had on the night she died. But unlike Moira and Fighting Bear, Sarah looked completely solid, completely alive. Sarah? My voice came out as a whisper. I've been trying to reach you for 3 years, but you were too angry to listen, too guilty. She knelt down beside me. I need you to forgive yourself, love. My death wasn't your fault. I should have driven that night. Should have picked you up myself, instead of letting you drive in the rain. And then we might have both died. Tom, sometimes terrible things just happen. There's no one to blame. She touched my face, and her hand was warm and real. But you have to let me go now. You have work to finish here. Fighting Bear and Moira approached us, their hands still clasped together. The Cherokee warrior spoke in accented English. Your sacrifice has freed us both. We are forever in your debt. But more than that, Moira added, you've restored the balance to this mountain. The protective spirits are awake again. No one will die alone or in fear here anymore. I looked around the clearing. The 7 elderly people were gone, but somehow I knew they were at peace. The oppressive sadness that had hung over the mountain for weeks was lifting, replaced by something gentler. What happens now? I asked. Sarah smiled. Now, you go back to your life, continue your work. Help people understand that science and spirit don't have to be enemies. She kissed my forehead, and I felt a tremendous weight lift from my shoulders. 3 years of guilt and grief, gone in an instant. Will I see you again? When it's time. But not for many years yet. She looked at Fighting Bear and Moira. You have new friends now. They'll watch over you. The 2 spirits nodded. Fighting Bear spoke. This mountain is protected now. The Cherokee ancestors are awake, and Moira's warning songs will guide the troubled dead home. You will be our voice in the world of the living. Moira stepped forward. Anytime you hear my singing, know that someone needs help. Follow the music and trust what you find. Sarah kissed me one more time, then began to fade. Take care of Echo. He's been protecting you from things you couldn't see. And then they were all gone. The clearing was empty except for me, my dog, and Dale Ramsey, who was holding his radio and looking confused. Tom? Tom, what the hell just happened? One minute you were standing there talking to thin air, the next minute you collapsed. You've been unconscious for 20 minutes. I stood up slowly, feeling strangely energized despite what I'd been through. Did you see the people? The elderly folks who were sitting around the tree? What people? Tom, there's nobody here but us. I looked around the clearing. No bodies, no signs that anyone had been there. Just me, Dale, and Echo, in an empty grove with one enormous white oak tree. But I could still hear music in the wind, faint but unmistakable, like the mountain itself was humming with contentment. Let's go home, I said. That was 6 months ago. The missing persons cases were closed when the elderly residents turned up at their homes the next morning, safe and healthy. They all reported having beautiful dreams about walking through peaceful forests, but no memory of leaving their houses. Mrs. McDonnell is still alive and sharp as ever. She says the mountain feels different now, more at peace. The wildlife has returned. Birds singing, squirrels chattering, all the normal forest sounds I was used to. I still hear Moira's voice sometimes, usually when I'm deep in the backcountry doing research. But now it's not sad anymore. It's protective, warning me about dangerous weather or difficult terrain. Once, her singing led me to a lost hiker who'd broken his leg and couldn't call for help. My acoustic monitoring equipment has recorded some interesting phenomena over the past few months. Sounds that don't match any known animal species, but aren't threatening. Music in the mountains. Conversations in languages that predate European settlement. I've started a new research project documenting what I call beneficial acoustic anomalies. The university thinks it's groundbreaking work. I just call it listening to the neighbors. Echo is healthier and happier than ever. Sometimes I catch him looking toward the mountains and wagging his tail at something I can't see. I think he has friends up there now. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the fog rolls through the valleys, I swear I can hear Sarah laughing. The mountains are full of voices if you know how to listen. Most of them are trying to help. You just have to be willing to hear them.